and welcome to the Voices of Victory podcast. I am your host, Mario D. Leone, and today's topic is going to be shame, the silent destroyer. Shame is definitely a very painful emotional thing, and we're going to go ahead and talk about it. This is going to be a science backed path to healing shame for both men and women, both. First off, what can we understand about it? Is shame is a deeply rooted emotion, obviously, but what it does is it distorts self-worth that also stems from childhood. There's some kind of memory connected to childhood, and there's experiences there with trauma or maybe even societal pressures. Now, overcoming shame is not easy. It's not easy for everybody. Now, neuroscience itself shows that shame activates the brain's threat response. Our threat response system actually goes off, and it makes it feel like an attack on the very identity. You got to remember the letter I is the identity, and anything you add on to I or I am is connected to the identity most of the time. So when you recognize these triggers, it's essential to dismantling shame's actual grip. Now, what doesn't work for men? Well, what are the common pitfalls when you're tackling shame? First of all, over rationalizing and attempting to think your way out of shame is not helpful, not by any means. Over rationalizing, overthinking, this is when our thought process is 90% in our head and not in our heart. Now, contemplation is an art. And when you grab a hold of the thoughts in your head and you start to ask yourself, how do I feel? And that's what an overthinker could do, or someone who's over rationalizing it. Try to rationalize it in their mind to somehow make it come out right in their favor. That's why it helps to journal. Journal is going to be reflective and supportive. But I do want to share that when you have a certain thought, it's ask yourself how you feel, not what you think. It's not about saying, what do I think? And then ask what you think again and have all these thoughts. It's actually grabbing a hold of that one thought that has an emotional charge behind it and ask yourself how you actually feel. How do you actually feel about that? That's going to be important. So thinking your way out of shame, it could just deepen the problem. It doesn't address the emotions that are actually there. It doesn't address the root. So we have to learn to think and feel our way out of it. Now, another major component is shifting blame. So this happens, a lot of men may shift their blame without doing any internal work. You got to remember, to feel your pain, to process your pain, is a level of work. To process your traumas is a level of work, and it frightens people. This is one of the reasons why addictions would exist, is because people will numb themselves through some form of an addiction, and we push away our feelings. So what happens is, when we're constantly pushing away our feelings, then what happens is we start to shift blame, start to blame everybody else, because it's really hard to hold yourself accountable and do the internal work that's necessary for acknowledging, like you're figuring out and acknowledging the external causes. And that can be very helpful. True healing requires confronting internalized shame, period. I'm just going to lay it down like that. And you know what? Courage also is part and parcel of that. Now, perfectionism is not too far away, but this is going to be more about equating failure with the identity. So remember, we talked about the letter I. I'm this, I'm that, I'm no good, everything after I and I am is added onto your identity. So what happens with this is people equate, men in particular, equate failure with the identity. I failed, therefore I'm no good. So this is an unhealthy relationship with mistakes. Mistake and error. In other words, every error that you mistake, every mistake that you make, every error that you create gets attached to your identity. You have to learn to separate those results from actually who you are. You're gonna make mistakes. There is no flawless living. All right. We're all flawed. Human nature is in a constant state of flux at all times. You can see that in my book titled The Beautiful Flaw. And quite honestly, human nature is in a constant state of flux. It's always changing. You are growing, changing, and shaping all the time. So when we equate failure with the identity, we take a mistake and we attach it to who we are. So, for example, I used to do screenwriting. So I used to say, all right, that mistake was pure trash. I didn't do good. Therefore, I'm trash. So we make an equation. And now what we need to understand is that screenplay that I wrote, it could still be in constant development. And this could be understood as having compassion for yourself. You have to be able to have a level of compassion for yourself. So we have to view mistakes as growth, not personal flaws, because personal flaws will reinforce that shame instead of actually resolving it. And this is where we connect every mistake to the identity, all right, and becomes problematic. Now, the science-backed path to healing for men, there's going to be holistic methods and science-backed methods, is seek targeted support. When we have a problem, it's kind of like in combat, in military combat, there's carpet bombing where they bomb a building and they just drop several bombs, right? Or there's a surgical strike where they send in a heat-seeking missile and go right to the core of the building and blow it up from the inside out, right? So seeking targeted support is literally that heat-seeking missile that goes through the window into the basement and blows up the whole building. Targeted support is very specific. For men, support groups or therapy tailored to male experiences, such as men's groups, and they're trauma-driven care, trauma-driven. That can actually help. Now, when it comes to healing modalities, there are somatic experiences. So dealing with breath work. I truly believe breath work has a great deal of healing from a holistic place. These are, again, more holistic modalities like somatic experiencing. And there are systems out there like TRE, okay, the trauma release experience, right? That's also really good. EMDR, which stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. It's a psychotherapy technique. EMDR is practical, it works, it's backed by science, it is functional. So that's a technique developed by Francine Shapiro to address shame and to address those things on a psychological level. For men, we need to reframe shame. In other words, reframe it, meaning we're going to need to look at it in a different way. We have to understand shame as survival, not weakness. Understanding shame is a learned coping mechanism. Let's understand that. It's not the best one, but it's a learned one. But breath work is also a coping mechanism. Meditation is also a coping mechanism. We can learn these things just as well. Rather than a flaw, it's not just that. Like, we will look at shame as not just a flaw. We'll say, all right, it's a flaw, but in actuality, it also connects to a coping mechanism. So we have to shift that focus from judgment judging ourselves to having that self-compassion. And how do we do that? Well, you have to watch your internal dialogue. The thoughts you say in the privacy of your own mind is going to be a big deal. So when people are constantly saying, I am this, I am that, I'm a piece of shit, I am this, I am garbage, I am that, you got to watch your self-talk. You have to literally analyze your self-talk and learn to challenge some of those thoughts. Absolutely challenge them. Have self-compassion. Start using the opposite statements, like I have self-compassion for myself. I am working on me. I am in the process of development. I'm in the process of letting go. It's a great phrase, by the way, in the process of. Now, that leads us over to cultivating self-compassion, right? We want to cultivate that self-compassion. We want to replace that inner critical narrative, that story. And if you have an inner critical voice, chances are you had an adult in your lifetime that criticized you verbally, and that became your inner voice as an adult. So you have to replace that critical inner narrative with self-compassion. I made a mistake, but guess what? This is not who I am. This is just a result. We have to strengthen shame resilient bonds, all right? So men, listen up, because to struggle to express vulnerability in relationships, vulnerability to me is like the cousin of courage. So if you're going to go into a relationship, you've got to have courage with that. And that means, guess what? Vulnerability is not too far behind. You got to remember that if I'm vulnerable with somebody, if I decide to be vulnerable with that person and they decide to not reciprocate that vulnerability, it says a lot about me and a whole lot about them. It does show how the other partner is not showing up in the relationship. Okay. That's what that means. It's how they are not showing up. And at that point in time, it's like you've done your job. They are showing you who they are. And you have to ask yourself, do you want to continue to reciprocate with somebody who is not necessarily going to bring the same vulnerability to the table? And if they're not going to bring the same vulnerability to the table, and how is growth ever going to move forward? Because in a relationship, you go through the courting moment, but then there's a threshold, the threshold of vulnerability. Once you cross that threshold of vulnerability, there's a whole lot of good stuff happening on the other side. On the other side, and if they can't reciprocate that vulnerability, you have to kind of question the idea of, like, do I really want to continue forward? They're not being vulnerable with me, right? So if they're not reciprocating their vulnerability and you see that happening a lot, you're going to get to a point where I don't know if I want to invest in something that is really not going to return on interest, right? Just understand that. So we have to be able to build connections where vulnerability is accepted and fosters that healing as well. And when you work with other men in a group, you could also speak on that vulnerability. When you see a bunch of guys together around a campfire, sooner or later, there's a lot of vulnerability that's going to start coming out. Let's talk about the women now. Let's move on, ladies, right? So this is all about healing shame and reclaiming worth, right? And I want to just bring this to the table, the understanding shame in women, why it persists. Women experience that shame that's also tied to the societal pressure, sometimes the pressure that, of what men put on them or what society puts on them. And it could be around appearance. I have to look a certain way. I have to be a certain way. I have to carry myself a certain way. I have to be a caregiver role in a certain way, or there's some kind of perceived inadequacy, right? Neuroscience, it literally takes us to the emotional triggers, because the brain's threat response system makes it feel like a survival threat. All right. So what doesn't work for women is the common pitfalls in tackling shame. First off, we can understand that you need to surround yourself with other well-wishers, people that have your best interests in mind. Journaling should be a very important thing. Overanalyzing is also not going to be supportive. Ruminating on that shame, trying to ruminate on the origins of shame and the deeper emotional processing of everything. Keep in mind that when you are ruminating constantly on shame, that can really amplify the emotion. All right, that's what it does. Think of rumination. If you don't know what it is, it's like a cow chewing on cud. It's chewing on it over and over again. And when you're constantly chewing on something mentally, you're just like that hamster wheel over and over again, energetically, just moving that hamster wheel around. And it's kind of like we're stirring up the same problem, we're stirring up the same emotions. And the hardest part is not having well wishers around you, people that could be a support system around you. It's so important. Now, blaming society is going to be a common thing, and that could be a problem. So, when you're blaming society without any personal growth, without any accountability, then what happens is we need to recognize those external factors because they're crucial to the healing process. It's crucial to addressing old past beliefs that have been internalized. Okay. Now, when we're focusing solely on behavior, that's important because what you could all understand is that every behavior has an impact. And that's what I want to bring to the table. When it comes focusing solely on behavior, that can be a problem as well because you're equating worth with action, and that can trap women in cycles of perfectionism. All right, I have to be this way. Also, self criticism. I have to be this way. I have to look this way. I have to buy that makeup. I have to do this a certain way. And there's that societal pressure on that, right? And there's a lot of external chasing. And those we externally chase things, right? We'll chase the house, we'll chase the car, we'll chase the makeup. We chase all of these things, and being happy inside, being content inside without the need of some external validation or approval, right? You want to understand the beauty within, not just the beauty outside is amazing. Don't get me wrong, right? Don't get me wrong. But you want to recognize that beauty within. You want to see that because perfectionism is destructive. We are all flawed. All of us are flawed. Every human being is flawed. Most people hide it more than others. And that perfectionism that you put onto yourself could be a heavy weight in the modern day of being a mom, the modern day of trying to get all the things for your family, trying to be super mom, do all those things that want to move you forward in life. So the science back the science backed path to healing with women seek that trauma driven support again, just like the men. Therapies for women like internal family systems, IFS, or somatic approaches, right? Breath work for women is also really powerful. It's important to address that shame that's tied to to childhood, okay? Those societal conditions. Practicing the mindfulness during the day, the self-awareness. And believe me, I do believe that, especially if like you're a mom and you're carrying all of these different responsibilities, it's like the first words out of their mouth is, when do I have time? When do I have time? That's the first thing out of their mouth, right? When do I have time? And we have to take a good hard look at the schedule, be realistic with ourselves, and say what is low value and what is high value. Obviously, kids are high value, but what's low value? Is binge watching for 4 hours going on? Because that's low value. That needs to go. And once that goes, once those low value things go, that compresses your time and it allows you to find the time to work on certain things. I'm the type of person, I'm going to speak as a person here. If I have to wake up at 4 a.m., which some people don't want to do, I will do it because taking accountability is really a difficult thing. So I want to just share that self-awareness and mindfulness is going to be huge for you. Helping other women notice triggers without judgment, and do that for yourself as well. Use phrases like, I'm observing this feeling that's here, and there's no blame. Not blaming. We have to redefine your self-worth and separate your identity from the actions. We have to shift that I failed to, I just made an error, right? We have to emphasize growth and learning over perfection. That you're human. You're a human being. You are in a constant state of flux. To the women out there, you are like the moon. Look at the moon. The moon is never whole perfectly. It's changing. Goes to a crescent, to a full. It's constantly shifting and changing. And your human nature is just like that. It's just like that. Building safe relationships, that's important as well. Building safe relationships that thrive on being out in the open, maybe being in public a little bit, not being so introverted, but being a little extroverted as well. Getting out a little bit, right? But building safe relationships is that shame thrives in isolation. So I want to say that specifically to the women. No isolation. You got to be able to get out a little bit. So seek out connections and groups that are going to support you, because you need to be felt, you need to be seen, you need to be heard, right? And valued, to normalize that vulnerability that is so important. And I truly feel that if you're with a partner who doesn't explode when you explode, and they ground themselves, they're able to ground themselves in that emotion and allow you to just vent out. That can be a relationship that's powerful and can move you forward in good ways. What do I mean is, you're having a grounded partner. So when you have a meltdown, that they can handle it. Because the worst thing in the world is when you have a meltdown and then they have a meltdown and then there's conflict. Let's take a look at some universal strategies. These are universal strategies for healing shame. Get curious. Curiosity is a tool. We don't always have to be so serious and judgmental. We could cultivate curiosity and ask ourselves mentally about that shame. What is that emotion trying to teach me? Emotions are just signals. They're trying to signal something. So observe it without any judgment. Create space for that healing. It's so important. Now, visualization isn't a bad thing. Visualize or imagine an alternate narrative. Imagine living without the shame. See yourself on the other side of what that would be like. Visualization does rewire the brain. There's science that backs that. The brain can rehearse healthier emotional patterns. And you can do that. Redistribute responsibility. You have to be able to distinguish between what you're responsible for and what belongs to other people, right? Whatever pain that you felt versus what doesn't belong to you, and you're just carrying it, right? It's kind of like carrying luggage from somebody else, especially in cases of trauma or abuse. Some of those things could come from another person, and you've just been blaming yourself for a really long time, And something that is amazing when it comes to trauma is the phrase, and I've seen people use this phrase in trauma circles, is they ask the person, haven't you punished yourself enough? Let me say that again. A person with trauma who's self-punishing based on what had happened to them that wasn't their fault, maybe in childhood, and they'll punish themselves in many different ways. And the big question is, haven't you punished yourself enough? right? Very important. So we have to be able to embrace those changes. And one way to embrace them, change is scary. Change is part of healing. And change doesn't have to be big steps. It can be small incremental change. So it's important for you to embrace incremental change, focus on the small, consistent steps towards growth. Okay? Healing is a gradual process, it is not a destination, and there could be several small changes. If you're not a journaler, if you're not a person that journals, journal. If you can't afford therapy, journal. Please check out NAMI.org, NAMI.org. They're very helpful. They have a lot of resources. Now, what's the path forward for healing for all of us, right? In regards to shame. Shame is not evidence of brokenness. It is just a survival mechanism. It can be understood and could also be transformed. So, by understanding what we've discussed here today, we can foster that self-compassion. Both men and women can actually reduce shame's hold and, of course, step into a life of authenticity. Authenticity means no longer hiding parts of who you are. And we can step into that empathy in regards to supporting other people, right? If you see someone else. And that's why when people do come together and they do have similar experiences, they could start to share and see different things. We don't want to fall into comparison. We want to fall into empathy to understand where they're coming from, what they've been through. We want to respect that everybody has a journey. Here's what you want to get. There's a lot of people, especially on social media today, is creating comparison culture. Your journey is not their journey, and their journey is not your journey. You are unique as a fingerprint is. And when you were born, in most countries, most parts of the world, you were given a birth certificate. And I want you to think of that birth certificate as that is your right to be here. It's almost like your driver's license to be in the world. That is your right to be here. That is your right to get out there and do it in the best way, to make your life in the best way. Hope is a process. Healing is a process. Discipline is a process because life and you, your soul, is a process. And that's all I'm going to say. And I'll see you on the next video. Take care.